speak to the opening session of the ODU Model United Nations. I was the faculty advisor to the students who ran the program, and they arranged for him to come, having heard him speak the previous year here in New York. At the time, Mr. Gazarian, as we called him, was director of the Division of General Assembly Affairs, an extremely important role. And yet he eagerly took the time to come and speak with high school students at a regional Model UN in Norfolk, Virginia. That was the beginning of an association with the ODU Model UN that continued until his death, and as you shall hear, will now continue in perpetuity. Over the years at ODU, and then at Bentley College, now Bentley University, where I moved in 1987, Jean became a mainstay of our Model UN programs. He came to our conferences, he served on our advisory board at Bentley, he met with students in New York each year in November for ODU, or January for Bentley. He mentored the students, both those on the Secretariat and the high school delegates throughout the Model UN each year. He remembered birthdays. He gave gentle encouragement and guidance, and somehow always seemed to know what individual students needed to hear and made them feel like the center of his universe. Jean was a marvelous storyteller. He was there for most of the iconic events of the UN's history in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. He humorously recounted incidents such as Khrushchev's shoe banging in the General Assembly, Castro's seemingly unending address during the general debate, all the while teaching students a bit of French and a bit of Russian and drawing lessons from those events. Jean used to tell students that he had fallen in love with a woman at the UN, l'Assemblée Générale, teaching them a bit of French grammar in the process. And they fell in love with him. In many ways, the Model UNers from ODU and Bentley became his children. They visited him in New York, and he visited them in Virginia, Japan, and elsewhere. On hearing of his passing, Alan Rogers, an ODU MUN alum, wrote, "Oh no, my heart just broke." Such an amazing storyteller, diplomat, and kind human being. Both ODU and Bentley awarded him honorary degrees, and he delivered the commencement address at ODU in December 1986. In 2007, he also received an honorary degree from Drew University, for which he was assistant director of the UN seminar from 1977 until 2012, a period of 35 years during which he taught hundreds of students, some of whom are here today. As I alluded previously, the ODU Model UN alumni are in the process of launching an appeal to create the Jean-Bernard Gazarian Memorial Scholarship Fund. Their initial modest goal is to raise a $50,000 endowment and award at least one scholarship a year to an ODU MUN Society student who exemplifies the qualities of teamwork, cooperation, and bridge building that characterize Jean's life. It is surely a fitting memorial to a man so idolized by those students fortunate enough to interact with him over the years. Over the last 10 days, as my former students from ODU and Bentley and Japan have become aware of Jean's passing, I have received messages from many of his MUN children. Among the words they used to describe the man they adored are humble, inspirational, modest, accomplished, devoted, witty, kind, influential, gentle, patient, learned, humorous, exuberant, beloved, mentor. Several of the students wrote their own specific remembrances and asked that I read them. Bob Kolchak was Secretary General of the Bentley Model UN in the mid-1990s. He wrote, "Jean was a great man. He was a kind and gentle soul with a wonderful ability to bring out the best in everyone with whom he interacted. I recall a time before the Bentley MUN when I was nervous about how I would do as the SG. He took me aside, gave me counsel, and eased my fears. I cannot recall exactly what he said to me, but I know it was exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. In this way, and in so many others, he had a profound impact on everyone whose life he touched. We are all a product of our experiences, and I know my life has been made richer because Jean Gazarian was part of it." Toshio Hoshino was a Rotary Foundation scholar at Old Dominion University as an undergraduate from Sophia University in Japan, who went back to Japan to become the founder of the Japan Model United Nations Society. Toshi wrote, "I remember when Jean came to visit Tokyo, probably by the invitation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and our MUN students in Japan were all thrilled to receive him. I am sure that he enjoyed the time with us in Tokyo much more than his official duties. My wife Chikako and I had the privilege of visiting his home in Long Island and met Marie-Lise and his brother Pierre. It was the time when we saw him very relaxed, and they all welcomed us and made us feel truly at home. Gosh, that was already 20 years ago. Intercollegiate MUN programs in Japan are as active as ever and have been expanded to organize a national high school MUN beginning 10 years ago. I am proud to be one of Jean's disciples. Like many other of his disciples, I cannot express enough my feelings of appreciation to him for his kindness, instruction, and love. I miss him." Chris Ho, graduate of Georgetown University and former Secretary General of the National Model UN, and at one time a member of the US mission to the UN, wrote, "What an amazing man in life. I first met him when the ODU MUN first invited me. His charm and wit made me feel instantly that I'd made a friend for life. And with time I realized how much he had accomplished, both in learning so many languages for communication and in building understanding among nations by his devotion to the nuts and bolts of the UN machinery. Having worked on the UN's own oral history program, I was delighted to find someone who had started working for the organization in its preparatory phases and continued throughout its history. He was full of funny stories about multilateral diplomacy, but behind them lay a treasure trove of lessons learned that he was eager to pass on to successor generations. Later, when I was a US representative in New York, I attended some of his training programs for new delegates to the UN. He joked with me that I didn't need it, and joked with others about this Chinese man named Ho on the US delegation. Chris is German-American, not Chinese. But he was very serious about making sure everyone knew how to give their country the best possible representation in UN diplomacy. I was glad in later years to hear that what he was up to, and to see how one Secretary General after another turned to him to run this or that special committee or conference and fix yet another urgent international problem. Jean had a special knack for getting along with everyone and winning their confidence. I think his secret, no secret really, was that he cared so much about people and about world peace. Having lived through the terror of war, he devoted the rest of his life to preventing it. I will miss him, and the world will miss him more than it knows. I will always cherish his friendship and example." Linda Kong from Bentley, who's with us today, she was there in the 1990s, wrote, "For a man of his accomplishments and experience, Mr. Gazarian was one of the most thoughtful, gracious, and humble people I've ever met. He had told me that the UN was his family, and the students he worked with in the Model UN, his children. He had a way of making people special and important with gestures of kindness and thoughtfulness, like sending an e-greeting card on your birthday. He will be greatly missed, but not forgotten. And finally, Dan Frank, the Old Dominion student, who in the early 1980s first came to New York with Pam Raley, who's with us today. Dan asked to recruit Jean to come to Norfolk. Dan very much wanted to be here himself and read these words. However, unfortunately, he had a death in the family earlier this week and could not be here, and asked that I read it for him. I will conclude with Dan's words. Spending the last week reading entries and replies on various email chains, websites, and social media forums, it has been interesting to note the consistency of responses to the news of Jean's death. Intellect, wit, kindness, humility, dedication, devotion, and inspiration. These were the unanimous impressions of the many lives he touched. Not coincidentally, they are also the traits most often ascribed to servant leadership. But by no means do these even begin to touch on the depth and breadth of the character of the man who was so beloved by so many. Thoreau claimed that most men lead quiet lives of desperation, but clearly he never met Jean. On the contrary, I would have to say that Jean Gazarian led a quiet life of inspiration. Throughout his lifelong dedication to serving the cause of peace through the United Nations, he inspired generations of diplomats to become better peacemakers through their words and their interactions with each other. Through his 3 decades or more of devotion to serving the numerous model United Nations around the world, he inspired countless young people to look beyond their own familiar culture, to put themselves in the shoes of someone from another culture or country, and to see the world's conflicts from different perspectives, all the while spending time getting to know the students and counseling them on personal issues of all kinds. Tens of thousands of adults, some of them now diplomats themselves, live in a world they can understand better and serve better because of Jean. Through his post-retirement work at UNITAR, he inspired another generation of new diplomats to become servant leaders at the UN and in their home countries. I will never forget one particular interaction I witnessed with Mr. Gazarian. We were visiting Colonial Williamsburg one summer. We had just finished a tour of the governor's mansion. In the courtyard, Jean struck up a conversation with one of the women who was acting as a kitchen maid from the period. She beamed as she told him all about having seen the Queen of England during the royal visit to the mansion the prior summer. He proceeded to ask her all about it and was genuinely engaged and enthralled by her story. By the time we left, the woman was beaming. I am quite certain that she knew she was the most important person he had met in a very long time. On that day, this man, who in the General Assembly had served as host to kings and queens, presidents and premiers, inspired me to try to see the ever-present good in every soul I encounter. To this day, he is my inspiration as I strive to be a better person. In all the years I knew him, I never heard an unkind word or a harsh comment pass his lips, or witnessed anything less than a kind and gentle interaction with others. Saint Teresa of Avila said, and I'm quoting now, "God has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes through which he looks compassion on this world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands through which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands, yours are the feet, yours are the eyes, you are his body. God has no body now on earth but yours." End quote. Jean-Bernard Gazarian inspired us all by his wit, intellect, kindness, devotion, dedication, and humility. He built a better world. He made us better people. And by the way he lived his life, he inspired us all to try to do the same. Surely this was a man of God.